This is Catherine Parker from The Haunting of Hill House. You're listening to Derek Thomas and the Monday Morning Critic podcast.
Harry? Harry, say something, will you?
I really can't.
You didn't know how this one was going to turn out, did you?
It's like you said, there's nothing you can't do in a race car.
We won. We won. Now, can you walk? Or am I going to have to carry you?
Where to?
Victory Lane.
Yeah. Walk. Hell, man. I'll race your ass.
My next guest is an award-winning cinematographer and photographer. His work as a cinematographer in Days of Thunder, The Last Boy Scout, and The X-Files the movie remains some of the most visually stunning movies ever made. He currently owns and directs the Ward Russell Gallery of Photography, which is, I just found out, is celebrating its 10th anniversary, which has some of the most amazing still photos you'll ever see. Please welcome my guest, Ward Russell. Ward, thank you for coming on today.
Derek, thank you very much. My pleasure to be here.
So I have to say, before I start going into your life, one of my places that I travel a little bit, one of the places I really want to go, and I can't tell you why, maybe it's Breaking Bad, I don't know, maybe it's my movie fan, it's New Mexico. I really like it. How is New Mexico, and why? How is that where you ended up? Why is that drew you to New Mexico?
You know, it's been a love affair with New Mexico ever since I was in college. I grew up in Kansas and attended the University of Kansas. And during the summers, I would come out and work for the Santa Fe Opera Company. And at the time, I said, you know, this would be a great place to live. I'm going to come back here someday. And it only took me 40 years, but I finally made it back.
and I have to say, I find on your Facebook, it is so funny, some of the little comments you leave about some of the photographs you take, whether it's at a diner or, I don't know, of a car, something random, and the sense of humor you have, you're really a fun follow on Facebook.
Well, thank you. I would always prefer to leave people smiling than sad. So I try to look for, in most of my photography, I try to find elements that make people happy. And also in my comments about them, I tend to find the humor in them.
Yes, you certainly do. And one of the things I left out, and shame on me, is that you also are responsible for over 500 commercials. So, I mean, your career is still going strong. You're doing your still photography. But before we get to that, I know you mentioned Kansas. You're my second guest from the University of Kansas, I think, in a row, because my last guest was Dee Wallace, who is in E.T. She's an actor in a bunch of things. Who was also a Jayhawk. So, how much of the University of Kansas? Because I know you have a very strong art background. Very strong background in theater, a bunch of other things. How much did the University of Kansas play into that, Ward, for you?
Well, I spent 5 years going to school there, so all my formative years were there. I started out just as an art major. In high school, I thought I'd be an actor, and that didn't work out too well. So I found that tech theater might be more interesting because I was always good at building things and backstage. And so when I went to the university, besides being the art major, I enrolled in the theater department. And at the time, KU had a really strong technical theater department. And all of my interest in scenic design and eventually lighting design, which I have followed all through my career, came from those roots there at the university.
Yeah, and one of the things I wanted to ask you, and I'll be embarrassed if I'm wrong with this, I thought I read somewhere where you spent time in the Navy. Am I wrong with that?
No, right in the middle of my college career, I said, I think I need a break. So a friend of mine and I dropped out in it was my sophomore year, and joined the Navy.
Wow.
And spent 2 years cruising around. I thought I'd be in the Mediterranean at that time, but as it turned out, no sooner did I get in the Navy than Vietnam raised its ugly head. And so my time was spent steaming around off the coast of Vietnam.
Yeah, when we talk about your time in the Navy, do you think any of that played a part into the professionally who you are today? Whether it's you're looking at things visually, did the Navy play a part in any of that? You think?
I'm not sure about the visual part, but it did play a really strong part in making me realize I really did want to finish my college degree.
Right. No, that would make sense too. And I did want to get your thoughts because, the Academy briefly dropped cinematography, which I was absolutely stunned that they would even consider this. And obviously they brought it back. What, Ward, in your opinion, why would they even consider that? I feel like cinematography is the most underappreciated aspect to a movie. I don't know why they would even consider that option.
Yeah, and I agree with you totally. I mean, to those of us in the field, none of us could believe it, especially since the head of the Academy is a cinematographer.
Wow.
What that decision process was, I really don't know. I guess it had to do with cinematography is often considered one of the technical fields, along with all of the other creative costume design and set design and all of that. But in actuality, cinematography is much more than that. It's the look of the film. It's without it, you wouldn't see any pictures. It ranks right up there with your directors and your actors, in making the creative part of the movie.
Yeah, and I swear, I mean, if I was to put a second on that list, cinematography, you're absolutely right. It's the backbone of every movie. And if I was to put a second underappreciated aspect, it would probably be a musical score or a film score. Because if you have a poor film score, if you have poor cinematography, that film just is not going to, it's going to come across very poorly, regardless of what the writing and acting are like. Is that an accurate statement, you think?
It is. It's very accurate. I mean, try watch it. Turn the sound off sometime and watch a movie on TV. It doesn't take long before you go to sleep.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true. And, I'm looking at your life, and I've done a lot of research. You have a very strong art background, film background, photography, theater. You spent a lot of time in art galleries, and I was so happy when I read this because I'm like, when I watch your movies, I love the feel. It's a very settling feeling. I love the way it comes across. And I think you said this, where you spent a lot of time in art galleries, specifically studying paintings from the 1600s. Talk a little bit about that, Ward.
Well, I was totally enthralled with the drama that you get in the Baroque painters. Their use of light and dark and shadow is so strong and so dramatic that it really appealed to my sensibilities. And as a budding cinematographer and as a lighting designer in theater, it just sucked me in. It was like, oh my God. I mean, how can you've gone from the Renaissance that has beautiful colors, but is basically about graphic design and flatness, into the 1600s when it was all dark and moody and it just, I mean, it's a completely different look.
No, that's well said. And before I get to Days of Thunder, I watch it probably once a month, and I watched it again because I knew I was speaking to you today. I got to tell you, many movies from the 80s and 90s just don't hold up. Visually, they look dated. I'm going to tell you, Days of Thunder, 30 years later, looks about as beautiful as a movie can look. I mean, do you notice that too?
Well, it's been a little while since I've watched it, but I do have a big poster on my wall from the movie to remind me.
Oh, very cool, very cool.
Yeah, but no, I did watch it not too long ago, I must admit, and it holds up as a movie. You
Yes.
know, not just in the look, but
Yep.
in the story. You know, it's an action adventure thing that's kind of timeless. I mean, Tony Scott as the director was, you know, a master at making these epic action adventure movies.
Absolutely.
And his sense of style comes through in all of the departments, you know, in art direction and wardrobe and makeup and hair, and is a major influence in the look of the cinematography. You know, he's my mentor for sure, since he's the one that actually moved me up to cinematographer. I was a gaffer for him on several pictures before I became a cinematographer. And so my relationship with him went on for about 10 years, doing both TV commercials and movies.
Yeah, and I have to say, Ward, when he passed in 2012, I was really saddened. I mean, obviously when people pass, it's a tragic thing, but I don't know. Tony Scott was, as you said, such a master at his craft, and I mean, you knew him as a human being. I mean, away from as a person, not so much as a professional. That's how we know him, people that watch his movies. But I was really, Ward, I was really just upset and taken back by his passing, because he seemed like a not only a great professional, which is documented, but a pretty very solid human being as well.
He was one of the nicest guys you'd ever want to meet. You know, he was very demanding at wanting to get the best out of everybody, but at the same time, he wouldn't ask you to do anything that he wouldn't do. And he appreciated what you did do for him. There was always a thank you at the end of the day. There was always a well done. No, he was a remarkable person.
Yeah, and how many times in life, Ward, do we whatever your profession might be in life, do people ever end with a thank you? It's almost like a rarity these days for people to be that cordial, that polite, that kind, right?
It's very seldom you get it, and unfortunately, in the movie business, you know, they seem to think if you got a paycheck, that's enough of a thank you, but it's not. It really means something when somebody actually physically comes up and says, "Well done, thank you, mate." You know they mean it.
Yeah, and I remember. I mean, I can't believe it's already 8 years ago. You know, almost 7-8 years ago. But I remember when he did pass, people were just saying the kindest, exactly what you've been saying. Wonderful human being, wonderful person. But the one positive in all of this, I guess, is his work will be around forever for people to enjoy. Hopefully that's one part that people remember about Tony Scott. If they didn't know him as the human being, they can appreciate his work as a professional.
And it will be remembered for a long time. I still get calls from people that want to talk about Tony and the work.
Wow.
It's amazing. You know, I have a couple young directors that check in with me every once in a while wanting to talk about Tony's style and Tony, and because they're so impressed with what he did and they're trying to emulate it in their current work.
Yes, well said. And there's a couple terms that I want to ask you. I purposely did not look these up because I wanted to ask you. You just mentioned one. And I know movies really well, but I feel like an idiot when it comes to these terms. I don't know what they are. So I'm hoping you can help me with two of these terms, right? So What is a gaffer? Explain to me exactly, because a lot of people don't know what that is either, and they watch movies and they hear the term a lot. What is a gaffer?
Well, there are many definitions, that run around out there, but the primary one is it was an English term that gaffer was always the head person. He was the boss. And somehow that got adopted into the motion picture world as the head lighting person. The gaffer is in charge of all of the lighting under the supervision of the cameraman. And the gaffer then will have a crew of people that he supervises to achieve the look that the gaffer and the cameraman have decided they're going for.
Okay, so if we work our way down, we have the, I don't want to say down, that's the wrong word. If we work our way as far as hierarchy on a movie set, right?
Right.
We start with the director of the photography and cinematographer, which is the same thing, right?
Correct.
Okay, and then we have would the cameraman be next under that? Am I right with that?
Well, the cameraman's the same also. The three words are pretty much synonymous.
Gotcha.
what happened, I guess originally there was a cameraman, and then the cameraman actually operated the camera when they were using hand crank cameras, and he would stand there and grind out the film at 24 frames a second or whatever it was back in those days.
Right.
But as films grew up, there started to be more and more cameras used on any one film. So you had more cameramen, you had more people operating cameras. So the person that actually sits as the camera is the camera operator. And then you had the cameraman that was in charge. Then you had 2 or 3 cameras. So then you needed another term like director of photography. He was in charge of all of the cameras and all of the photography. And cinematographer just came in there. It's a good question because it was always film. It was always cinema. So, but it just fit in there somewhere. I don't know exactly where it came from. It's kind of hard nowadays with digital. What do you call all of these people in the digital world? It's really
that's a really good point.
Mind-blowing.
Yes, that's a great point. And then we kind of go with the gaffer, and then there's something called a best boy. What does a best boy mean?
This is the one that most often gets asked, and you find one of these in most departments. If you're from the business world, you could best equate it with the CEO, the Chief Executive Officer.
Oh, okay.
He's the one. He's not the boss. He's the one that works for the boss, that gets everything done for the boss. So in the electric department, the best boy is the right-hand man of the gaffer, where the gaffer works with the cameraman, then the best boy works with the gaffer in providing all of the manpower and equipment and things, all the tools that the gaffer needs to create the look that he and the cameraman are working on.
No, that's well said. And so basically, I mean, in reverse order, people, especially in your career and in your life, you work your way up, correct? Like you spend time on a set. In one movie, you might have a role as best boy, then you work your way up to gaffer. Is that an okay way of looking at that?
Exactly. You start, well, in the Hollywood structure, as you know, it's union organized. And so when you get into the business, you usually start out in a bottom category in the union, which would, in my case, would have been an electrician, a studio electrician, or they now call them lighting technicians.
Yep.
And that's where you learn your set etiquette and all of how things work, mainly by carrying a lot of heavy equipment and cable and getting filthy dirty and wondering if you really want to do this or not.
Yeah.
I remember the first job I had at Universal Studios, they sent me down to the Coliseum to strike all the cable from a big chute they had down there. And if you've ever lifted a 100-foot piece of 4/0 cable, it weighs 100 pounds.
Wow.
And we had to coil those up and throw them on our shoulder and carry them over and dump them in a truck. And I did that for 3 days straight. And if I'd had to do that for a 4th day, I swore I would never go back to the business.
Oh, my gosh.
Fortunately, they put me on a show the next day, and I managed to hang around.
Yeah, and it's amazing because, like, in any field, you have the same kind of, like, hierarchy, right? I mean, if you work construction, you start off as, you're doing the manual work, then you become foreman. So, yeah, that makes total sense to me.
Yeah, exactly.
And I don't want to leave this out. I mean, you had a lot of work on Top Gun, Beverly Hills Cop 2, Revenge, some phenomenal movies there as well. I didn't want to leave that out.
But, yeah, I was gaffer on those movies. Which were early Tony Scott movies. I had been doing commercials with Tony for several years when he first came over from England, and then when he got the opportunity to become a director in the States, he was using a cameraman named Jeff Kimball at the time, and I was the gaffer who worked for Tony and with Jeff. So I went along on all these movies.
And I was just about to ask you, what does this name mean to you, Jeff Kimball? And I got to say, the three of you made for a phenomenal team. I mean, my gosh. I mean, look what you guys put together.
Well, we worked together for quite a few years.
Yep.
And it was sort of the triumvirate. We all worked together in helping create what some people call the Tony Scott look in his films, the ever-evolving Tony Scott look. But it was a combination of the three of us that eventually that came from.
Yeah, because it's also the Ward Russell look, right? Because I mean, it's all of your contributions put into that. 'Cause it definitely is a certain look and a certain feel. And another guy that I want to ask you about that has that, I don't want to say it's the same type, but he certainly has his own feel, is Tim Burton, and you worked with him on his first movie. Am I right with that?
I did. Tim was a young animator at Disney when we did Frankenweenie, which was a half-hour black and white live action cartoon, you might say, which was great fun. I was a gaffer for, I believe Tom Ackerman was the cameraman on that.
Wow.
And that was a long time ago.
Yeah, and I mean, I know you've been asked this a million times. I'm sure as much as you've been asked about Tony Scott. I mean, people always ask you, did you know he was, Tim Burton was going to be? But I guess I'm going to rephrase that question in a different way for you, Ward. I don't know. I feel like the very successful people, you and Tony and Tim, it's like the two things you have to have is a work ethic and passion. Like, I mean, I'm certainly knowledge of what you're doing. I feel like that's the one thing that you have in common that Tony Scott had, that Tim Burton has. Is that a good way of looking at it? Is that an accurate way of looking at that?
Well, as you know, the motion picture is not an easy business.
No.
And if you don't have a passion for doing it, most people give up after a few years because they're not willing to put in the amount of work and time that it takes to get where you want to go. So you're right that you need the passion and work ethic. Somebody once said, all you got to do is really show up in the morning. But you'd be surprised how many people don't do that, or they come late, or they don't have a work ethic. I worked yesterday, I'll take today off. I mean, it amazes me how many people are that way.
Yeah,
I'm sorry, but growing up in the Midwest, we were taught a work ethic through my family, through my father. We showed up every day, and I enjoyed every day. I don't understand people that would just take off and go do something else. Strange. Yeah,
that is so well said, Ward. And to piggyback on that, I had an actor on that was talking about. He's a veteran actor, great actor. He was talking about the newer up and coming actors, the younger actors. Not all of them, just a select few. They work their butts off to get to where they are. They pay their dues. They're on sets, and their face is buried in their cell phone. And it's almost like they had a work ethic for a little while. Now it's on pause, but. My gosh, if I got to a place where millions of people wanted to be and I was one of the lucky few, my cell phone would be buried in my car or buried in my house. So yeah, it all goes back to work ethic, whether it's continual or how it's. You're so right with what you say.
Exactly, and I got to say, there's not a single day that I didn't enjoy what I did, and that certainly helps. With your work ethic, you enjoy it, so you want to do more and you want to do it better.
No, that's well said. And one of the things that I did want to talk a little bit about Days of Thunder. It's just you. I mean, when I researched this, excuse the expression, you worked your ass off on this film. It was 6 months. It was how many hours a day were you working on this film? I mean, and it was right up until the deadline, I think, almost too, right?
It was. We actually went back for some reshoots the week before they had to put the final print out. We shot back at a race and got the scenes that they needed. The editors went through the footage until they grabbed the two little bits they needed and instantly stuck it into the movie, and it went to its final print. So, yeah, we were shooting right up to the end. It was my first feature film as a cinematographer. So I was a little, as you might say, intimidated by the whole process. So I did work my ass off. And Tony once told me, he says, I said, Tony, why did you hire me? how did you know I'd do it? He says, well, I knew you would work harder than anybody else because
Wow.
you're new at it. And I did.
Wow.
And I enjoyed every minute of it. That was the great part of it.
Yeah.
And, like all movie making is long hours, 12, 14-hour days are not uncommon. And most of it was on location, so you're working 6 days a week. I'm not trying to make it out harder than any other movie because all movies are hard to make.
Right.
But you just do it.
Yeah, and now it's much more. You mentioned this earlier. Much more of a complicated thing with digital, and it's a little bit more complicated. And it's your first role as a cinematographer. I can't even imagine the pressure you put on yourself. Plus, you're working for a very demanding director, a good director, a kind man, but very demanding, and there's nothing wrong with that. So I can't imagine the pressure you went through for that half a year. You're right, other people do that. But you know what? I mean, the work quality isn't always there with other people. It was certainly there with you in this film,
It turned out very well, I must admit. It was a continuation of my work with Tony. I had done 3 or 4 pictures with him before as a gaffer, so I was very comfortable with the lighting part of being a cinematographer. The challenge came. I had been shooting some small commercials and things, and I actually took some classes as a camera assistant to learn more about how cameras function, because as a gaffer, that's the one thing I didn't know. I knew film stocks from working with the cameraman and going to dailies all the time, and I knew lighting backwards and forward from both being in theater and 15 years already in the movie business. But it was the camera that it was kind of still an unknown quality to me. What I did learn was if I hired me a really good camera assistant, then I was okay. I could do the rest of the job. And so we got through the show.
Yeah, that is so well said. And one of the things I want to ask you, and I feel like a fool for asking you these basic questions, but when my girlfriend and I were watching, Days of Thunder, and I love the music, the acting works, the music works. It's a perfect movie. For me, it's one of the most underrated movies in history. But when I look at the way the cinematography looks, I don't know what you mentioned lighting. What is the word I'm looking for? I said to my girlfriend, it's got like a haze to it, but it's like beautiful. It's just beautiful. What is the correct word? What would you say? Is it just simply lighting?
Well, back in those days, the British directors had come over, and when confronted with the stark, bright sunlight that we had in California compared to the overcast days that they were used to filming in England, they freaked out. And so they were always looking for elements to soften the image. And Tony found a special effects guy that said, ooh, we can do this with smoke. And so the haze that you're referring to is we would fill up the stages with it was not real smoke; it was a chemical smoke of some kind.
Right.
And that mixed with some soft lighting made the Brits feel a lot more at home. But it also made for a wonderful look in the pictures. You'll notice that most of that era films that we did, we used a lot of smoke and we called it. There's another term for it that I can't think of at the moment. Atmosphere. We'd call it atmosphere.
Right. Yeah, and it's a beautiful look. I'm watching the scene. The scene when Tom Cruise comes in on a motorcycle, beautiful, and Rowdy's home with the lake, and all the scenes with the barn and the farm, and the scenes in the hospital, and when Tom Cruise is on the racetrack going through the smoke on the last race. It all looks so beautiful. It's honestly just beautiful the way the imagery it's. And I don't want to over compliment you here because it's going to sound fake and phony, but it's just I lack the words to describe it. It's just such a beautiful looking film.
It came out well. It was most Tony Scott films came out well. He was always a pleasure to work with because you knew he was going to give you all the tools you needed and all the time you needed to make the best looking picture that you possibly could. And then when he was in the editing room, he would fight for the best looking shots. He actually would sacrifice sometimes the performances just because the picture looked better in the other takes. So actors don't usually know about that. So it always made me happy, but I'm sure it would make them upset if they knew about it.
I ask writers this question, and I'll ask you too. Do you think actors appreciate the way you guys busted your ass to put this film and make it look as stunning as it did? Do you think actors appreciate, and I don't mean the way they look, I mean the way the everything else looks. Do you find actors are appreciative of that, or is that something that kind of goes unnoticed or not complimented or commented on for the most part?
You know, it's not just actors, it's people in general. You know, there are those that see the cinematography and the music and all of those elements that go into a movie, and then there are those that just see the acting. I think, you know, both of them are viable viewpoints. You know, because like I'm a visual person. I see things, but I can come out of a movie and my wife will say, "Oh, wasn't the music great?" And I'll say, "What music?" So I can empathize with those people that don't necessarily notice how great everything is.
Yeah, and I guess that's maybe a hidden compliment, right? The fact that they don't comment on it is the fact that it's up to par and it looks beautiful. I guess that's a way of looking at it as well, you know.
Right. Yeah, if they say something about it that it's usually they don't like it, you know it's really bad.
Is there a scene in Days of Thunder, Ward, where it came out better than even you thought it was when you guys were drawing it up or planning it? Is there a scene that unfolded better than you thought it was going to look?
Yeah. Well, I have to compliment the editors because of all of the race car scenes and the wrecks that were at the races. Tony would sit down and he would go through with the stunt drivers with little fake cars, you know, about how it was all going to happen. But we found out that once the first car hit another car, you never knew what was going to happen. And everything went everywhere and went totally chaotic. And it was then the editor's job to take all that footage that we shot and actually make a scene out of it that looked really great. So we don't want to forget how important the editors are to putting these projects together.
Right. No, that's well said. You know, you mentioned you and your wife coming out of a theater. Is there a movie that you've seen recently where you've been blown away by the cinematography?
You know, there's so many good cinematographers now. It's amazing. But my problem is with all the CGI that is in movies now. You're always struggling with, well, how did they do this? How much of this is cinematography? How much of this is CGI? Where does the one stop and where does the other start? I'm continually looking for movies that don't have CGI in them, just so you can appreciate the old world cinematography and the old world the way of making movies.
Yeah.
So I've actually started going to some animated movies. You know, it's amazing what they do with animation because the mental ability to visualize totally the movie before it's made and to put it down on paper one frame at a time. You know, as in analog movies, we would go in the morning and the director would stage the scene, they'd rehearse the scene, they'd figure out what they were going to do, then we'd talk about where we're going to shoot it, how we're going to shoot it. We had all the elements to gradually build a scene and create it. But we could do it with all the elements there. In an animated movie, it's in somebody's head.
Right.
Somebody can figure all that out in their head before they actually do it. And I really have to compliment them on that.
Is it still called cinematographer in an animated movie, or are there other terms and words you would use for that?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, they used to have a cinematographer when they were doing cell animation.
Right.
But now that it's all done on computers, I would assume there's a cinematographer that is a consultant, if nothing else, in the look. And I know they hired me on a job right at the end of my film career and we were doing a car commercial, and we shot part of it live action on a stage. And then they sent me down to the computer room where they were experimenting with creating a light source in the computer that they could light the cars, and they want them to look like it was the sunlight. So they used me as a consultant to teach them how I lit cars on stage with real lighting, so that they could emulate that in the computer, with the way that metal reflects and light is reflecting. And it,
right.
Unfortunately, I was sort of working myself out of a career.
That's true. The way you're describing it, absolutely. Yeah. Yeah.
Now when you watch movies and you see, all of the CGI work that goes in it, so many of these movies, the cinematographer is just photographing the actors in front of a green screen, and they've got to be able to visualize what the other people are going to be doing around them in the CGI. It's a whole different way of looking at creating the motion picture.
No, that's well said. And you mentioned some cinematographers, some well-known ones. Roger Deakins, Darius Khondji, Claudio Miranda, Robert Richardson. Have you met some of these, some of your fellow counterparts when you were doing cinematography? Did you have a chance to meet some of these people?
It's really strange. There's only one cinematographer on a set, and cinematographers are not known for going out and partying with each other. Photographers are kind of individualistic people. We go out and do things by ourselves.
True.
I was fortunate enough that I worked a lot and didn't have a lot of time to just hang around. And so, no, I did. There were a few that I met occasionally, but not to say that I hung around with other cinematographers. I mean, Jeff Kimball, obviously, because I worked with him for years. But very few other. I've met more cinematographers living in Santa Fe and having them stop by the gallery than I ever did in Hollywood.
Right. And it would just be such a fascinating forum just to hear, all of you guys speak about, what you think about cinematography. I know what you think, but it just would be such a great, and I know you guys don't all hang out party, but like it's just from perspective and experience, especially a guy like Roger Deakins and you, I could listen to you guys talk forever. It's just very interesting perspective on what you've done and kind of what lies ahead,
Right. Yeah, we have our trade magazines, the American Cinematographer magazine and the International Photographer magazine, and so there's always somebody being interviewed and writing about their work. But you're right. I mean, to hang out with them, it would be kind of fun.
Right.
But it was not something that I really did regularly.
No, and I have a few more questions for you. Thank you so much for the time you've given me, Ward. It's been so much fun talking to you. So I have to say, we talk about, and I thought I read this too, and if I didn't, I'm going to be really embarrassed. The reason for you not being a cinematographer anymore, I thought I read where that the days were wearing, which clearly is obvious. There's other things going on. What is your reason for? I don't want to say it's a change of career because they're very related, so it's really not. And I get why you're doing what you're doing now. But what is your official, why did you decide to move on from filmmaking?
How old are you?
I am 45.
Well, ask me that same question when you're 63.
Okay, all right.
And you will have answered your own question.
No, and I get it because I got to say, podcasting is something I love and I do, and I have a job. But I understand. I want to be very careful here with my words. There are things that go on politically or with other people that make me, I love what I do, but there are other factors involved where it's like, okay. Life is short. There are other things that are out there. So if that's what you're leading to, I kind of get where you're going with that because it makes sense to me.
Yeah, my career has always been one of learning and advancing. I was I was a theatrical lighting designer for 5 years, and I was an electrician for 5 years, and I was a best boy for 5 years, and I was a gaffer for 5 years, and I was a cameraman for 20 years. And you reach a point when you're looking for that next thing to do.
Right.
What's right for you at that point in time? And I had moved to Santa Fe, and I'd been commuting back and forth to Los Angeles for 10 years. Doing some not so illustrious movies and a lot of TV commercials. And, you reach a point where you go, well, maybe it's time to go on and explore other things in life.
Mm.
And living in New Mexico, like you said, you've never been here before. It's a wonderful place to live. The skies are bright. The shadows are wonderful. The weather's great. And I love taking pictures.
Yeah.
So when the edge was wearing off of the type of work I was getting in the film business, which was that. Well, actually, this is one of the reasons. Digital had come along. The red camera was taking over the camera world, and everything was changing to digital cinematography. And I was at the point where I said to myself, no, wait, do I really want to invest all the time and effort it's going to take to learn this whole new technology and to advance with it? Or is it time to move on to something else? And I voted for it's time to move on to something else.
No, that makes sense, and I do apologize if that was like too deep of a personal question, because it could have been easily none of my business questions. So I do apologize, Ward, if that's something I shouldn't have asked. No. I mean, it's a curiosity for everybody. I mean, I have some friends that are writers in LA that have written articles about me over the years. I've always wanted to propose a project to them to. Where did the cinematographers go? Because you reach a certain age, usually in your early 60s, in the cinematography world, and people are looking for younger people. Right. And most cinematographers kind of just disappear somewhere. They don't just stop, but they pop up every once in a while. I have friends, and most of us go and we teach college for a while. I taught at the College of Santa Fe for a year or so, and I taught at the other schools in town. I taught cinematography. I had my own camera rental business where I had bought some film cameras, which I would rent out to local commercial companies and things. So I was exploring all these different worlds. And you just reach a point where you say, okay, been there, done that. Let's move on to the next stage of our life. And, I realized I still had a lot more that I wanted to say and that I wanted to do, and that to go on in my still photography world allows me to do that. Yeah. I get to travel 2 or 3 months a year and take photographs while my wife vacations. And then I get to come back to my gallery, or my man cave, she calls it, and process and edit and print. And I can do it all by myself without any producers or directors around to tell me what to do. Yeah, no, I get it. And it makes so much sense, because I don't care what you do for a living. Everyone has that, I don't mind my job, but you're clearly passionate about photography, and I absolutely understand now. I totally get it. Would you ever go back for the right? If somebody said to you, Ward, I'm shooting a movie. I'm doing it with the older cameras, not the newer and the digital or whatever. Would you go back? That has come up a time or two, and boy, you do stop and think about it. But then I think, no, I've been retired now from the union for 12 years. Right. So the learning curve to get back into it, and the time and energy that it would take to do it would be way too painful. And I feel that I had a young lady stop by through here. She was on her way to Nashville. She was a singer.
And we visited for a while. She loved my photographs in the gallery. She wanted me to come down to Nashville and do some work for her down there. And I thought about doing it seriously for a couple of days, and then I realized that she deserved somebody younger and faster and newer and in the right mode. I was the previous generation. And that's kind of how I look at it now. I go on with my photography work, and I'll leave that film business to the younger generation.
No, and it's the ultimate compliment that people either call you, because you mentioned earlier, people call you, people come see you. I mean, that you mentioned your teaching. Ward, that's the ultimate compliment to your abilities, you as a human being, is that how people see you is clearly at a level of respect that's off the charts.
Well, I thank you for that. I appreciate it. I just, I have enjoyed every day of my life. There's never been a working day when I wasn't happy to get up and go to work. And I still am.
Yeah.
I'm down here. I got up early this morning so I could come down and try to figure out this Skype thing and make sure it was working somehow.
Yeah.
So I just keep going on. Hopefully everybody does that same thing.
Yeah, and I did want to mention that, I went to your website and I've seen many of your photographs, like I mentioned earlier on social media. They are so beautiful. That's the other thing I could never do. I am so bad at taking pictures. Your pictures are so full of life. I love them. I don't know. I just think that's something you're born with, I think. Where, yeah, you can get better as a photographer. I agree. But I think the really good ones like you and the professionals, the ones that really, really know what they're doing, that's either you have it or you don't. Is that an accurate way of looking at photography?
There's a lot you can learn technically about photography, but being able to see is the trick. And that's what I learned. The motion picture world taught me that. Or I learned it somewhere along the way, but it was, being a cameraman, I've been taking pictures now for 40 years almost.
Wow.
And I thank the motion picture world for that. People look at my photographs and they say they look so cinematic. I said, well, that's probably because I was a cinematographer.
Yeah,
and they tell stories. I try not to just take pretty pictures. I try to take pictures that have more to them, that have a bit of a story to them. Hopefully, a light and humorous story. I'm not just out there clicking things. I'm out there instead of a whole scene, I have one frame to tell a story in. And it's that one frame that is hanging on my wall that people enjoy.
Yeah, for sure. And is there anything, before I let you go, is there anything you want to give out your website so people have it? Is it wardrussellphotography.com? Is that what it is?
It is. It's wardrussellphoto.com.
That's it, wardrussellphoto.com. You are on social media as well.
I'm on Facebook and Instagram and Twitter.
So yeah,
I'm in all of it. Yeah, go to the website. It has a lot of my photography on it. And like I said, my 10th anniversary show is hanging in the gallery now. It'll be up for about 6 months until people get bored of it.
So Ward, do you have, and excuse my lack of knowledge here, but do you have like shows outside your, or is it, do you have like special events that people can come and I know you mentioned the 10th anniversary. Is it just somebody can come in and look at a special collection, or do you have like an event that night where people come and they purchase the photographs, they look at what you have? How does that work?
Right. Each time I do a new show, I open it with an exhibition opening.
Okay.
Like we had a huge party. You couldn't see the photographs for the amount of people that were here. But I usually have one or two of those a year here at the gallery. I only show my own work because if I showed other people's work, I'd actually have to run the gallery like a legitimate gallery.
Right.
Now I can just lock the door and go away and do some photography whenever I want.
Right.
That's what we do.
So my last question is, and I promise this is the last one. When you and your wife, you say you travel 2 or 3 months out of the year. Do you pick a specific scenic place that you want to go to because of photography purposes, or do you pick a place based on leisure purposes, or is it a mixture of both?
First of all, we picked someplace that culturally sounds interesting to us.
Right.
You know, where we have an interest. Oh, it sounds interesting. Well, let's go down there because, like, we went to South Africa for 3 months. I've never been there, you know, and I've read all about all of the problems they've had down there, and it was now Mandela was out of jail, and things were looking up, and we said, let's go down and explore it. So we went down. We did. We spent a month in Cape Town getting used to the culture and the people, and because it's all of a sudden when you're a minority, you stop and think about things in a different way. And when we felt comfortable, we rented a car, and for the next 2 months, we made a big loop all around the country of South Africa. We would go to another town. We'd spend a week. If there was something interesting, maybe longer. We'd go to an animal camp. We went to all the various states in South Africa so that you spend enough time that you get to visit with the people. You're not just rushing around on a schedule or anything. And that's the way we like to travel.
Yeah, and I got to say, I mean, I know you're not in the business anymore, but that would make for either a great documentary or a great show you could watch on Netflix. When you travel, you almost like an Anthony Bourdain type of show. I don't know. I just think it would be very interesting, but that's my biased view, Ward.
Well, okay, I'll look into that.
Ward Russell, thank you so much for your time. You let me be a pain in the butt to you, and you were so kind and such a gentleman about it. Thank you for everything you've done for not only me, but all fans of movies and photography. So, Ward, I appreciate your appearance so much.
Well, thank you much for inviting me. I've certainly enjoyed it, and I'd like to welcome everybody to come visit my gallery and my website. And yes, the photographs are for sale.
Hold on a minute. Don't you think we ought to talk?
What, about how I'm gonna run? Sure.
About how you've managed to live as long as you have.
Think you can drive?
Well, we can drive. He can drive beyond the limits of the tires, the engine, the car, anything else.
There's nothing I can't do with a race car.
Well, that's the difference between you and me. There's only so much I can do.
You want me to work the pit and you drive?
You run good?
Thank you.
And we'll see how you do in a crowd.
He's desperate to get your attention.
You got it. I've walked into a jungle.
Come up here and do it. I'll take you to a race.
Really, I can't. I'm a doctor. I'm cool.
Think your driving can improve?
I'll take your word for what a car can do, but I'm not taking anybody's word for what I can do.
I don't want you to hold a bad opinion of Cole. I believe it scares him. He needs reassurance from you that he's okay. After all,
How could you ignore me like that? I wasn't ignoring you.
you're his doctor. The driver gets his bell rung and a couple of lights flicker, and loses what he needs more than his eyesight, more than his reflexes, more than anything in the world.
I've raced with my legs broke, heart bruised, eyes popping out of my head like they're on springs.
He loses his need. The need to drive right out there on the ragged edge.
He doesn't believe you can drive anymore.
How long before you find out if you're really good?
You just want to race again.
Or you're really lucky?
You get back in that car, you'll die.